There are seasons when the soul is cast into shadow, when the light dims not only around us, but within us. The fire once burning in the heart becomes a cold ember, and we say, "I am depressed." But I ask you, what if the descent is not a fall, but a calling? What if your sorrow is not a sickness, but a sacred summons? You have not lost your way. You are being pulled into it, into the cavernous deep, where the soul speaks in symbols and the truth whispers not in words, but in visions, dreams, and silence. In the hour of despair, you stand at the threshold. You have reached the place where the outer world no longer sustains you. The masks of daily life, the demands of duty, the pursuit of pleasure, all collapse under their own weight. And what remains? A vast emptiness. But within that void, a voice begins. Not the voice of reason, not the chatter of the world, but a deeper, older voice. It speaks not to your ears, but to your bones. It says, "Go within." This is not madness. This is myth in motion. When you feel you are breaking, you are, in truth, being broken open. When your dreams seem strange, chaotic, or dark, they are not random. They are rituals of your becoming. You are not disintegrating. You are dismembering the false so that the true may rise. You must learn to sit with the serpent and walk with the shadow. The light you seek is not beyond the darkness. It is born from it. The self that is emerging is not new. It is ancient. It was buried beneath years of adaptation, of trying to please, to perform, to perfect. Now, the old ways crumble. The ego cries out in confusion. But the soul begins to remember. Symbols will come to you. A red door, a spiral, a tree split by lightning. Do not ignore them. These are not fantasies. They are the language of your own awakening. They are the archetypes of your rebirth, sent not from the outside, but from the depths of your own being. In your suffering, you are not alone. Others have walked this inner labyrinth. They, too, wept in silence. They, too, trembled before the abyss. And yet they found that the path led not to destruction, but to revelation. Do not seek to silence your sorrow. Listen to it. It has come to teach. It has come to reveal the parts of you that were left in the shadows long ago. Depression is not a void to escape. It is a chamber to explore. In your grief, your loneliness, your weariness, the self is stirring. You are not ending. You are becoming. The world tells you to return to normal, to numb yourself, to forget. But your soul urges you, become who you truly are. This is your initiation. This is your night sea journey. What you call depression, I call the dreamscape of awakening. One day, you will rise, not as the person you were, but as the person you were always meant to be. And then you will know, it was not depression. It was the first cry of your soul being born. Would you like a longer version or a version adapted for a particular audience or setting, e.g., podcast, lecture, monologue? Depression, in its deeper psychological sense, is not merely a disorder to be corrected or a chemical imbalance to be managed. It is often a sign that the soul has initiated a journey inward, a symbolic descent into the unconscious. When everything that once brought meaning begins to lose its color, when the familiar feels distant and strange, when energy drains and joy becomes a memory, something profound is happening beneath the surface. This darkness, though painful, is not empty. It is filled with the potential for transformation. What appears on the outside as disinterest, fatigue, or hopelessness is the outer expression of an inner event, the psyche withdrawing from the surface of life to attend to a deeper necessity. The unconscious, vast and layered, holds within it not only forgotten memories and repressed emotions, but also the roots of meaning, imagination, and inner wisdom. When the conscious mind becomes too rigid, too focused on the outer world, or too identified with the ego's roles and expectations, the soul intervenes. It withdraws energy from the surface and calls the individual inward. This withdrawal of energy is felt as depression. The light of consciousness dims so that the eyes might adjust to the darkness within. This is not punishment. It is a preparation for something new to be born from the depths. The descent into the unconscious is a mythic movement. Many ancient stories reflect this. The hero who falls into the underworld, the goddess who disappears into shadow, the seeker who loses their way in the forest. These are not just external adventures. They are reflections of the internal journey. When depression takes hold, one has entered that mythic space. It is a sacred space, but it does not feel like one. It feels like death, like loss, like being abandoned by life. And yet, in that apparent stillness, things are shifting. Symbols begin to emerge. Dreams intensify. Thoughts become strange, looping, surreal. Often, they are not random. They are communications from the unconscious. They reflect what has been neglected, hidden, or forgotten. In the silence of depression, the unconscious finds its voice. The more one tries to suppress or ignore this descent, the more the symptoms persist. But if one turns inward, listens, observes, and accepts the experience without judgment, something shifts. The depression becomes not just an illness, but a guide, leading the way back to the inner self. To descend into the unconscious is to face the truth that the conscious mind has avoided. It is to rediscover the parts of the psyche that have long been exiled. It is to stand in the presence of one's inner truth, unfiltered by society, by expectation, or by fear. Depression, then, is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough in disguise. It is the soul's way of calling attention to what truly matters. It strips away illusions, not to destroy, but to make room for what is real, meaningful, and whole. There comes a moment in life when all that once felt solid begins to crumble. Meaning slips through the fingers. The future seems covered in fog, and the present weighs heavy like stone. This is often labeled as despair, as depression, as crisis. But behind these experiences lies something far older than pathology. It is a rite of passage, an ancient inner process that strips away what is no longer alive so that something more authentic can emerge. This period of inner darkness, often called the dark night, is not an error in the human condition. It is part of a sacred rhythm of transformation, one that is built into the psyche itself. The dark night is not chosen. It arrives unannounced, often in the midst of ordinary life. It may be triggered by loss, failure, betrayal, or a sudden sense of meaninglessness. It is marked by a deep disconnection not only from others, but from oneself. The outer world continues as before, but the inner world begins to dissolve. The mind searches for clarity, but none comes. The heart searches for comfort, but it feels only silence. In this silence, the old self begins to unravel. The roles that were once worn with ease, parent, partner, professional, feel hollow. The identity built over years begins to feel like a mask that no longer fits. What is dying is not the body, but the illusion of self that was shaped by society, expectation, and unconscious compromise. Though this stage feels like isolation, it is in truth an encounter. One stands face to face with the unknown aspects of the psyche. This confrontation is not gentle. It breaks down certainty and exposes the frailty of ego. Yet it is necessary. Without the collapse of the old, there can be no space for the new. The dark night is not about destruction for its own sake. It is a crucible. In this sacred fire, the outer layers are burned away, revealing what has always been hidden, what is essential and indestructible within. During this passage, dreams often become more vivid, sometimes strange or disturbing. Emotions surface without explanation. Longings and fears emerge from the depths. These are not distractions or symptoms to be dismissed. They are signals from the inner world, part of the psyche's effort to guide the individual toward greater wholeness. One is being asked to listen, not to the outer voices of advice or correction, but to the inner voice that whispers beneath all turmoil. This voice does not shout. It waits, and only in the stillness of surrender can it be heard. The dark night does not obey schedules. It unfolds in its own time, demanding patience and humility. It cannot be rushed or avoided without cost. Attempts to escape it often deepen the suffering. But by remaining present, by allowing the darkness to speak, something begins to shift. Out of this inner silence, a new orientation emerges, not toward the world as it was, but toward life as it is meant to be lived, from the center of the soul. In times of inner turmoil, the world within begins to stir. What once was silent starts to speak, but not in language the rational mind easily understands. Instead, it speaks in images, symbols, fragments of dreams, sudden emotions, and strange visions that seem to appear out of nowhere. These are not meaningless phenomena. They are expressions of the inner world, a realm as vast and real as the outer one. The voice of this inner world does not follow the logic of reason. It follows the rhythm of the soul, the language of the unconscious. When life on the surface becomes unbearable, when joy fades and direction seems lost, the psyche turns inward. In that turning, the unconscious begins to emerge. What arises in this space can be frightening, even disorienting. Thoughts may no longer feel like one's own. Images may appear uninvited, wild, chaotic, beautiful, or terrifying. A person may begin to dream in vivid detail, sometimes with symbolic content that defies explanation. These are not signs of madness. They are signs that the unconscious is active, that something deeper within is trying to come into awareness. The inner world, long neglected, now demands attention, and it does not do so through polite conversation. It uses the language of symbols, the language of dreams, the language of the soul itself. In these moments, the conscious mind may try to resist, to suppress, to label these experiences as irrational or dangerous. But what is irrational to the ego may be entirely meaningful to the psyche. The inner world has its own truth, one that cannot be measured by logic or explained by surface analysis. It is a place of depth, complexity, and mystery. When the inner world speaks, it is trying to guide the individual toward greater integration, to reveal hidden parts of the self that have been buried beneath years of conditioning and fear. To listen to this voice requires courage. It means stepping away from distraction and noise, creating space for solitude, and allowing the images and feelings to arise without judgment. It means entering into a dialogue with the unconscious, not to control it, but to understand it. This is not a passive experience. It is an active engagement, a relationship with the unknown. One may write down dreams, sketch visions, follow the thread of a memory, or meditate on an image that lingers in the mind. These small acts of attention open the door to inner communication. The more one listens, the more coherent the voice becomes. The fantasies and visions that emerge in such states are not to be dismissed as delusion. They are symbolic messages, often carrying insight about one's direction, purpose, wounds, and potential. These symbols, arising from the depths, speak to the timeless human experience. They are part of a larger narrative unfolding within each person. To ignore them is to remain cut off from the deepest parts of oneself. To embrace them is to enter the true process of awakening, to walk the path not only of healing, but of transformation. There are moments in life when everything familiar begins to feel distant, when the person you thought you were no longer fits the person you feel yourself becoming. The energy that once flowed easily toward work, relationships, and daily routines begins to dry up. There is a heaviness that settles over the heart and mind, and nothing outside seems to bring relief. What is happening in such moments is not a failure of the self, but a split between the surface identity and the deeper truth within. The ego, the part of the psyche that manages daily life and maintains the image of who we are, has become disconnected from the deeper self, the core of our being that holds our unique essence, purpose, and wholeness. This break is not always visible, but it is deeply felt. The world may see a functioning person, still moving through the motions of life, but inside, there is confusion, restlessness, and sorrow. The mind begins to question, not only external circumstances, but the very foundation of identity. The things that once brought validation no longer satisfy. Praise begins to feel empty. Goals lose their meaning. In this space, the soul begins to stir, calling for something more real. It does not shout, but it pulls quietly, drawing energy inward, away from the outer performance and toward inner truth. This process is often painful because the ego resists. It is invested in its structure, in its routines, in its image. It does not want to lose control. But the deeper self does not seek comfort. It seeks wholeness. And for wholeness to emerge, everything that is false, shallow, or externally imposed must fall away. The person is brought to a threshold where they must choose between continuing to perform for the world or turning inward to reclaim what is authentic. This inner movement may feel like collapse, but it is the beginning of reorientation. The path is no longer about fitting in or succeeding in the eyes of others. It becomes about aligning with the soul. During this phase, silence becomes a teacher. Solitude becomes necessary. The individual is drawn to reflect, to ask deeper questions, to explore forgotten desires or neglected parts of the self. The inner voice grows louder. It begins to speak through dreams, through intuition, through the aching in the heart. These signals are not random. They are invitations to return home, not to the past, but to the inner center from which all genuine life must flow. As the ego loosens its grip, a new kind of strength begins to rise, not loud or aggressive, but rooted, grounded in something timeless. The break between ego and self is not a tragedy. It is a turning point. The despair that arises is not a sign of defeat, but a sign that the inner world is awakening. The person is being called to leave behind roles that no longer serve and to begin the real work of becoming whole. This is the beginning of the true path, the movement away from surface identity toward a life shaped by inner truth. When the outer world begins to fade in meaning and the inner world begins to stir, the psyche does not speak in plain sentences. It does not present its truths through direct instruction. Instead, it reveals its content through images, through emotions that seem disconnected from logic, and through symbols that rise unexpectedly in dreams, visions, or even in waking thoughts. These symbols are not random creations of the mind. They are ancient expressions that reach beyond personal memory. They come from the collective layer of the unconscious, from the deep well of human experience that connects every individual to something greater than themselves. These symbols are called archetypes. They are not inventions, but universal patterns of the human psyche. The mother, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the innocent child. These figures are not just literary characters or cultural ideas. They are inner realities that live within the soul. When a person experiences deep emotional turmoil, these archetypes begin to stir. They appear as inner figures, dream characters, images in meditation, or felt presences during moments of silence. They are guides, not because they give answers, but because they reflect essential aspects of the self that have not yet been made conscious. In a time of inner crisis or awakening, the appearance of these symbols marks a turning point. They show that the unconscious is not chaotic or meaningless, but structured, intelligent, and purposeful. A person may dream of walking through a dark forest, only to encounter a powerful animal or an unfamiliar stranger offering guidance. These are not meaningless stories. They are symbolic dramas, portraying the process of transformation taking place within. They speak a language older than words, a language the soul understands even when the mind does not. To interact with these archetypes is not to escape reality, but to deepen one's experience of it. The outer world may become unstable, but the inner world becomes more alive. The person begins to sense a greater presence at work, something mysterious yet familiar. These inner figures do not demand obedience, but attention. They must be approached with humility, curiosity, and a willingness to listen. Ignoring them or dismissing them as fantasy only strengthens their influence in hidden and unconscious ways. But by consciously engaging with them, through art, journaling, imagination, or quiet reflection, a dialogue begins. And in this dialogue, a path forms. This path is not created by willpower. It is revealed by the symbols themselves. They lead the person not outward toward achievement or conformity, but inward toward wholeness. Each symbol carries a fragment of truth, a piece of the puzzle that, when assembled over time, forms a more complete image of the self. These archetypes are not distant or abstract. They are alive within the psyche, waiting for recognition. They are messengers from the depths, carrying the wisdom and power of all those who have walked the inner path before. They do not show the way directly, but they illuminate it, step by step, through the language of image and myth. There is a tendency in modern life to treat suffering as something purely negative, something to be avoided, suppressed, or eliminated. Pain is seen as a problem, a flaw in the system, an interruption in the pursuit of happiness. But the inner life does not follow the logic of comfort. The soul is not interested in ease. It is interested in truth, in depth, in becoming whole. When suffering arrives, especially the kind that lingers in the heart and mind, it is often carrying meaning that has yet to be understood. It does not come merely to destroy, but to purify, to open, and to reveal what has been hidden or forgotten within. Suffering has the power to strip away illusion. It removes the distractions, the roles, the expectations that once seemed so important. It reveals the fragility of the ego, the limitations of control, and the emptiness of surface pursuits. What once brought satisfaction no longer does. What once provided identity begins to crumble. In this raw space, a person is brought face to face with the deeper layers of the self. The pain is real, but so is the opportunity it brings. It is an invitation to stop running and to begin listening. Often, it is through suffering that the most profound transformations begin. A person who has been living according to the demands of others or the unconscious patterns of their upbringing may find themselves suddenly unable to continue. They break down, not because they are weak, but because the structure they were living within is no longer sustainable. The suffering forces them inward, into reflection, into silence, into the mystery of who they really are. And in that descent, something essential is encountered, something that could not have been found through comfort alone. The process of awakening is rarely gentle. It comes with grief, confusion, anger, and fear. It challenges everything familiar. Yet within that challenge is a deeper wisdom. The suffering becomes a kind of initiation, a rite that marks the transition from one way of being to another. It prepares the soul to receive what the ego could never grasp. In the depth of despair, the seeds of a new life are often planted. These seeds take time to grow, and they grow in darkness. The individual may not know what is coming, only that the old self is dissolving. This dissolution is not death, but transformation. In the midst of suffering, the person may begin to sense moments of clarity, glimpses of peace that arise not from escape, but from surrender. The pain is no longer fought against, but accepted as part of the journey. The very act of enduring, of staying present with the discomfort, allows the psyche to reorganize itself around a new center. This center is not built on achievement or appearance, but on authenticity, connection, and inner truth. The suffering was not without purpose. It was the path by which the soul called the person home to themselves, through the darkness and into a life more aligned with what is real. What may appear on the surface as depression, crisis, or emotional collapse is often the soul's profound attempt to awaken something deeper within. Beneath the heaviness and confusion lies a sacred process, one that strips away illusion, confronts the false self, and reveals the symbols, archetypes, and truths long buried in the unconscious. This is not a descent into disorder, but a descent into meaning. The pain, the silence, the inner voices and images are not signs of weakness or failure. They are the raw language of transformation. They speak of a turning, a passage, a reorientation from the external to the internal, from the ego to the self. Each step through darkness, each encounter with inner symbols, each surrender to the unknown brings the individual closer to their essential nature. This process is ancient. It does not follow the logic of the world, but the rhythm of the soul. Suffering is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of a deeper life. The one who walks through it, who listens and remains present, emerges not broken, but whole. What was once called depression is, in truth, the sacred fire of awakening, calling the individual back to their true center, where a more authentic, grounded, and meaningful life begins.